Hey guys, it's Craig here and welcome back to another episode of Craig's Dungeon. Not that long ago, I picked up this record. This is a vinyl copy of Helen Reddy's Greatest Hits, and I love her singing, and there's some great songs on here, and it's a good record. I also have it on one of these guys. Now you might recognize that as being an 8-track cartridge. And I was playing this the other day just for fun, and all of a sudden it stopped working, and it completely just, no music, no nothing. So I pulled it out of the machine, and sure enough, something very common that happens with these tapes is that they break. Now, they don't actually break. There's a splice in these tapes, and I'm going to show you why that is. We're going to take this apart. We're going to show you how these things work. I'm going to do a minor repair on this one to get it so that it will play again. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about 8-track cartridges and why they don't sound as good as they should. They certainly don't sound as good as cassette tapes. And why are they called 8-tracks when there's only 4 tracks on them? Well, we'll find that out too. Okay, so that's the dungeon stool. All right, let's move the camera and get to work. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I never actually owned an 8-track player when I was growing up, but my uncle did. And he often had a lot of problems with these things stopping working and seizing up and all kinds of stuff. So that when I was about 12 years old, we used to go up to his cottage for the summer, well, for a couple weeks in the summer, and I used to have me sit down and repair all of his 8-tracks. So I had a lot of experience. Now this one here, I'm just going to take this one apart. This one is not damaged. It's not broken, but I am going to use it for parts because it's not a very good quality recording. But as you can see, the way these are constructed is that it's a continuous loop of tape. So the tape comes out of the middle of the reel, the center, goes through here, past the heads and stuff, through the roller here, which is what actually pulls the tape along, and then wraps itself back around on the outside. So it kind of does this. You just have to watch it doesn't unwind itself. Sorry about my hands, but that's how these things work. And they just go around and around and around. Now, somewhere along the line, there's going to be a splice. And that is what usually breaks when these things get old. So we're just going to set this aside for a moment. And we'll grab the one that we're going to be repairing, which is this one here. Okay. Now, this is going to be a little difficult for me to do because it's kind of intricate, and I have to get really close to this to see it. So hopefully I'll be able to, do this without getting my head in the way. A lot of these things have little tabs. Some of them are different than others. You're just going to have to kind of figure out, like, what it takes to, get, you can pry them open if you just release the little tabs. And it depends on, the manufacturer. There we go. Now you want to try not to break the tabs. But if you do, you do. I mean, there, that one's already come off. This one just needs a little help. There we go. Okay. I know a lot of you have already seen the insides of these things, but you know what? This has to be done anyway, so I figured I may as well do a video. But we are going to talk a little bit more about these things in a minute when we're done. So now I'm lucky with this one because it still has the little piece of aluminum splice here. And that's important. The splice that holds this tape together has to be made of something that conducts electricity, because that's what actually causes it to go to the next track. Because as you know, these things have 4 different, programs, I guess they're called, that you can select. And that's the splice that allows it to do that automatically, to switch from track to track. So, and I'll show you how that works in a few minutes when we're done. First thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to pull a decent amount of tape out of the cartridge, and you really want to make sure you don't let this get too tangled. This is it's like a slinky. If it gets too botched up, you're never going to get it back. So I'm going to pull out some tape. It's okay. We'll manage to get it back in the cartridge later. The tape. We just want to have lots of tape to work with. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a piece of Scotch tape, because we're going to need Scotch tape anyway. And I'm just going to put it right here just to stop that tape from coming off the, you know, from looping itself off there while we work on this. Okay? Now, let's grab the ends of the tape, and it's important that you don't twist the tape. You make sure that it has not gotten twisted. All right? And we're going to put it face down. I'm actually going to use this little contraption here that I bought years ago when I used to repair video cassettes. I used to repair video tapes for a movie store. When people would bring tapes in that got broken, he would have me repair them. So I bought this. Now, it's not the right size for the right size of tape, but it will serve its purpose to hold the tape in place while I make a splice. So if you don't have one of these, and most people don't, then just, you know, tape the, you know, use some adhesive tape to tape the tape down onto the table. Okay, so we're going to try to line this up, and obviously we need to make sure that the splice there goes underneath there like that. And then we're just going to grab a piece of Scotch tape, and we're going to lay it across there like this. This is how they used to do it in studios, although you can buy real splicing tape. If you're only doing one of these, then, you know, why bother? Just use this Scotch tape here, right? Yes, that's nice. Give it a little rub. Now again, the tape, the side of the tape with the music on it is facing down on here, and that's the side of the tape that faces outward when you look at the front of the tape. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out of here. And I'm going to trim the edges so that it's nice and neat. And then when we're finished, uh-oh. Well, look at that. Well, looks like we're going to have to construct a new foil thingy for this tape, because now when you play the tape back, it won't switch automatically from track to track. So, well, that's perfect. That just creates more stuff that we need to do here now. And that's perfect. Okay, let's do this. All right, so I'm going to flip that back over. And the splice is good, and we'll trim this, but now we have to get some sort of an aluminum foil little thing to replace the one that just fell off. Okay, I've got myself, you can either use a razor blade like this, and just put tape on one half of it so you don't cut yourself, or some sort of a sharp knife like that. And what I'm doing is I've got the tape underneath here, and I'm using this straight edge so that I can make a nice straight cut along the edge of the tape there. This is going to require me to get in the way of the camera, unfortunately. Okay, now let's see what we've got here. How did that work out? Not too bad. It's sticking out a little bit. We'll trim that up in a minute. Let me just do the other side. Go across, trim that off like that. And there we go. So there is kind of a rough splice. I'm going to get closer to this and trim this up better, and then we'll come back and we'll do the other part of it, which is the foil. Okay, so there we go. That's not bad. You know, you can get splicing blocks that, you know, make this a lot easier. And there's, you know, if you work in a big recording studio, of course, you have access to all that stuff. But not everyone has that. So now this, what you're looking at here, is the playing surface of the cassette, the 8-track. Usually the back of the tape is more gray in color than the front. So that's kind of how you know. Plus, you know, you've pulled it out of the cartridge, you know how it's oriented. And again, you have to just make absolutely sure that it doesn't get at all twisted. And I don't think we have any problems. I think I managed to keep it all straight. Yep, it's all, see, it's all the same direction. So, you know, this will now play, but it won't switch the tracks automatically. And I'm going to show you how all that works in just a few minutes. But first of all, let's make an aluminum splice here. What I did when I trimmed this tape, I used this razor blade and I just laid it down on the edge of the tape like that. And then I used another knife, and you can use another razor blade if you want, and I just carefully trimmed the excess off. So I ended up with a pretty clean splice. Now what we're going to need to do is get some aluminum foil. And I've done this before. It's a little tricky, and it's very difficult to do unless you can look extremely close up at what you're doing. So some of this is going to be a little bit hard for you to see. But what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to stick a piece of aluminum foil like this onto the tape, and then I'm going to just tape on either end here. Now it has to be the front of the tape, the playing surface of the tape, because that's the part of it that's going to pass through the mechanism, and that's what's going to cause this to switch tracks when this little aluminum thing passes by. So let's see if we can make this work. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just lay this on here, this piece of tin foil. It's not cut to size yet. And we're going to get a piece of Scotch tape, and we need to expose at least about a ½ an inch of the foil in order for it to do what it's supposed to do. So we're going to tape this onto there, like that, right? Okay, there's that side. And it's basically just the same as what we already, sort of just did with the splice. Okay, and about like that. I think that's going to do it. Okay, and so now I'm going to trim this again. And I have to get my glasses and go really close. I'm going to use my razor blade. I'm just going to lay it on here. Lay it on there like that. And I'm going to get my cutter, and I'm going to very carefully go along and trim these edges. It's not the best job in the world, but this will play, and it will do what it's supposed to do, which is switch the tracks. And I'll actually show you how that works. Let's get this all back into the cartridge. And the way we do that, I'll just bring this into the frame here, is we just get this pulled around. I'm going to remove that piece of tape. Just hold everything down so nothing, like I said, if this comes apart and unravels, you're not going to be happy. So now what we do is we just sort of put the tape back sort of where it belongs, and we're going to just pull it. See, we've got all this tape over here, We're just going to pull it out of the middle, gently holding it on here so it doesn't untangle. And there's our splice going onto the reel. And it's going to be a bit stiff. Hold it down and just keep pulling. And the tape will eventually take up its own slack. You don't want to hold this part too tight, because otherwise it won't take up its own slack. So just keep pulling it. It's getting shorter. Make sure you wash your hands before you do this. You don't want to get too much of your skin oils onto the tape. So clean hands when you're using, working with magnetic tape like this. There we go. See, it's starting to, it's almost all the way in. So once you get it almost all the way in, you just give it a little turn. And there it goes. There it is. Nicely wrapped up in its little spool there. Now, there's one more problem with this cartridge. And that is, if you can see, if I take this one apart here, you can see in the front here, if I lift up the tape, there's a little, this is called a pressure pad. And this presses the tape against the heads slightly so that it makes better contact and get better sound. Well, the one in this cassette, or sorry, 8-track, I keep calling it a cassette, has deteriorated. There's no foam left on that at all, which is pretty common. So I'm actually going to take the one out of this one. Tape is no good anyway. It sounds horrible. And if you can't find one, if you don't have one of these, then you can always use some weather stripping or something. I've seen people use that, but you have to make sure you put some tape along the front of it to make the tape slide along it easier. So we'll just go ahead and slide that in there like that. There, we finally got it in there. Just make sure the tape is wound tightly, and we want to make sure that, well, before we put this back together, just take note of this little rubber roller here. Okay, just remember that that's there. And then we just want to put the front so that the tape is behind the little thingamajiggies, and whoops, hold on. There we go. And it snaps back together. I actually broke one of the tabs when I took it apart, but that's okay. A little bit of Scotch tape. And there you have it. My Helen Ready 8-track is now repaired and ready for playback. Let's have a little bit of fun. Okay, so I have a 8-track player recorder here. This was actually sent to me, believe it or not, a couple of years ago or somewhere in there, and it was brand new in the box. Here's the box. And it had never been opened. Now this is probably from somewhere, but it's probably from somewhere in the mid-70s. And it had never been opened. Now when I got it, it didn't work right away. I had to service it, but that wasn't a big deal. A little bit of oil lubrication and whatnot. So I've got it hooked up to this little speaker here, and we're gonna plop this in. Now, I can't play this for very long because of copyright reasons, but we'll just prove that it does work, okay? Okay, that's all we're gonna do, all right? I don't want to get stamped for copyright issues. I have another tape that I can use to play around with this machine that won't run into that problem. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna play this through and let it run until the splice comes around, and we'll see if it does what it's supposed to do, okay? Okay, it's come to the end. It's almost, the funny thing about sometimes with these 8-tracks is that in the middle of a song, the song will just fade out and it will switch from track to track, and then the song will fade back in. That really sucked. But unfortunately, it's the only way they could fit all the songs on these tapes. Let's push this in and see if my little splice is going to work. We should see it go from track 1 to track 2, these little lights here. The moment of truth. Perfect. And then we pull the tape out so we don't get copyright infringement issues there. So it works! There you go. Now, I have a tape that I'm going to put in here, and I'm going to take this thing apart, and then just briefly show you how this thing actually works, how these tapes work, and then we'll talk a little bit about these and why they never really got sounding very good. And there's actually a little bit of a backstory behind these things. Okay, the first thing I'll show you here is where the tape goes, of course. You put the tape in there. Let's just open this little flap, and you can see what you're seeing here is right in the middle, right there. That's the head that actually reads the tape, picks up the signal from the tape. On the left-hand side there, right there is a little, those are contacts, okay? And when that piece of tin foil runs across those contacts, that's what makes this thing switch from track to track, just as though if you were to push the button that does the same thing. And on the right-hand side here, we have what's called the capstan, right back there somewhere. And the capstan turns and rubs against that rubber pinch roller that I told you about earlier, and that's what pulls the tape through the machine. Now the head has 2 tracks on it. If you can see, 2 little horizontal stripes going across the surface of the head. Those are the right and left channel. And that's why these are called 8-tracks, because although they have 4, I'll just zoom out here so you can see, although they have 4 different programs or tracks that you can choose from, because each one is stereo, each one has 2 tracks involved, that's why there's a total of 8 tracks on these tapes, and that's why 4 times 2, 8-track cartridges. That's why they're called 8-track. Okay, we're looking at the unit from the side here. I've got the casing off. I've got to be really careful because this board here has high voltage on it, so I don't want to touch that. So anytime you're taking something like this apart, you should be extremely careful because you could hurt yourself. The tape goes in the front here. like that. And on this tape, I've got some of my own music recorded. As I mentioned earlier, this unit actually does record as well as playback. So I recorded some of my original material in here. This is going to be really loud because this little speaker I'm using doesn't have a volume control on it. So. Oh. Now I'm just going to zoom in. And when I switch the tracks, you'll see this little platform here move because the tracks are running parallel on the tape. So it just moves up and down to get the different tracks. Some of you might remember that song. Pull the tape out, zoom the camera out, and that's how the channels or tracks on these things work. And of course, that capstan is driven, I'll just turn the machine up a little bit like this, it's driven by this motor. This motor turns this flywheel, and in the middle of this flywheel is your capstan, and that's what pulls the tape through the machine as it's playing. I faded it out there. So there you go. That's kind of how these things work. Let's do a little final chat about 8-tracks and why they never got to sound as good as they could have. Okay, so now you know why they're called 8-tracks. Why didn't they sound as good as they could have? Well, see, this format actually is a bit of a rip-off or a copy of a format that was used in radio stations widely in the 70s and 80s, probably even the 60s, not quite sure. And this was called a cart format. These tape carts used in radio stations were stereo. They weren't 8 tracks or anything like that. They were 2-track stereo cartridges. And they used to put commercials on them and even music. And actually these things used to sound really, really good. Almost as good as, you know, a vinyl record or even their little brother, the cassette tape, which these sounded very, very good as well. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So these cartridges ran at 3 3/4 inches per second, and they sounded very good. These here also run at 3 3/4 inches per second. But because they have 4 different channels on them, with each having 2 tracks, then the tracks are quite a bit narrower. So that doesn't allow for as much energy to be recorded on the tape. So there was a lot more noise and a lot more what we call dropouts, which is when the sound actually disappears for a split second and comes back. The other thing with these is that the formulation used for the tape was called ferric oxide, and this is not a very good recording medium for slow-moving tape. Of course, they used ferric oxide tape in recording studios back in the day, but those tapes were running at 7.5, 15 inches per second, and even 30 inches per second. Very high speeds, and so you can get very good sound off of those tapes. The faster a tape runs, the more information you can squeeze onto them. Okay. I know that sounds backwards because the tape's going to run out sooner, but everything is all, because the tape's running so fast, everything's all spread out on the tape, and it's a lot easier to fit everything in. So these never really ended up sounding very good because of that, and I don't know if there was ever any chromium dioxide or type 2 8-tracks ever released. I'm actually not sure of that. So these were also you know, made for sort of portable music. Not that many people really listened to them at home, although there were 8-track decks like this and stereos with 8-track players built into them and recorders. It wasn't a very popular format for home listening because people had, you know, they had their vinyl records. And not only that, but they're inconvenient. You know, you can't rewind them. You can fast forward them, but you can't rewind them. And if you want to hear a song again, you have to wait for the whole loop to go all around again and start over. So they're really not very good for, random listening for different songs. Now, the other thing is too is that the electronics that were built into these decks wasn't really the greatest. Now, there are some really good 8-track players out there still in service, and there were some very good ones released back in the day by manufacturers like Fisher and other audio manufacturers. They did make some decent 8-track decks that did sound pretty good, but most of the time people were playing back pre-recorded 8-tracks. And the way these things are duplicated in the factory, they don't sound very good because they're done at high speed. And as soon as you start doing things at high speed, I know I just said the faster the tape runs, the better the sound, but that's only if you play it back at the same speed that it was recorded in. These are recorded at high speed, and then we're playing them back at 3 3/4 inches per second. So the dubbing process was not ideal. You don't get the best sound if you dub at high speed like that. You guys remember those double cassette decks where you could copy one cassette to the other, and you could do it at high speed? Well, the dub, if you notice, the dub never sounded as good as the original. In fact, it sounded quite poor because of the high speed aspect of it. You're going to be losing a lot of frequencies up in the higher end when you duplicate a tape at high speed. And that's basically where these things fall short, is in the high frequency area. Even the pre-recorded cassettes never sounded very good either. And then of course CDs came along, and that was that. Now with cassettes, see, in comparison, cassettes, the tape is half of the thickness, or the width I should say, of an 8-track. But then again, a cassette only has 4 tracks on it. 2 tracks for side A and 2 tracks for side B, because they're stereo, right? So the tracks are probably the same width, but the cassette runs at half the speed of an 8-track. 1 7/8 inches per second, as opposed to 3 3/4 for these things. Why did these things sound so much better than 8-tracks? Well, a lot more care and technology was put into cassette decks. These things came along and basically stole the show. They're portable. You can rewind them, you can fast forward them, you can choose whichever song you want to play. Some cassette decks had features that would automatically go to certain songs on the cassette. And they were using tape formulations that were far better than regular ferric oxide tape that were used in these. This is a chromium dioxide. Actually, it's not chromium dioxide. This is called a metal particle cassette made by Denon. So they sounded very good. Of course, there was Maxell, TDK, Memorex, and some of the other ones you might remember as well. To add to that, they invented something called Dolby, which is, you've heard that in the surround sound arena, but Dolby noise reduction was brought into the cassette arena, which reduced the amount of hiss and noise that you would get from a cassette. So there was a lot of technical advancements that went into these that never really made it into the 8-track area. These things could have sounded a lot better than they do if there was a Dolby, if they used chromium dioxide tape, and if the electronics that were being, that were playing them back were as advanced as some of the cassette decks that we all knew and loved. Well, there you have it. I never dreamed in my entire life that my own music would be recorded on a darn 8-track. But there it is. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about tapes, audio tape, magnetic recording, or anything like that, don't hesitate to post a comment down below and ask, and I'll do my best to, answer it for you. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. Stay tuned for the next Craig's Dungeon. See you later. Be safe. Bye.